And then my favorite one is that graph in the bottom right-hand corner that just looks good, but you have no idea what it does.
Why dashboards are dead to just go over the top as we tend to do for fun.
We've realized that the folks that are the most successful versus the folks that are not as successful, there's kind of a three-step process where first,
Welcome everyone to Sleuth. We're really excited to have you here. If you are an engineering leader and interested in measuring and improving your engineering team to better align your engineering effort to business outcomes, you've come to the right spot. I'm joined here today by Carl, our lead solution architect here at Sleuth. I'm Don, your host, co-founder of Sleuth and CTO, and we are so excited to talk about something that we have been working on for the last, it would have been almost a year now. And we're finally today releasing it out to the public so that you can hopefully get some of the value that we've gotten, that our customers have gotten. There's a lot to talk about here, but first I'll let Carl introduce himself.
Hey everybody, Carl Bergen, I'm here. And as Don mentioned, solutions architect here at Sleuth. And I work a lot with our customers, making them as successful as they can be implementing any kind of engineering metrics program. And I'm super excited to join you here today to walk through a little bit of some of the things we've been working on recently and be able to show you really how you can be the most successful when you're implementing any kind of metrics program for your engineering team.
Yeah, because as we all know, there's a lot of data out there, but measuring and improving isn't solved by just a dashboard. Now, if you clicked on this video, you're probably thinking dashboards are dead. What does that mean? That sounds pretty rich coming from a company that sells a product which does give you dashboards and shows you and graphs data and shows you your different metrics. But I think in having done this and helped hundreds of teams over the last 4 years, we've learned a lot about where dashboards really aren't the answer. And in fact, I think just to steal your thunder a little bit, the teams that you've seen that are most successful are the ones that use dashboards in a very particular way.
Yeah, I think one of the big problems that we see with dashboards, as you mentioned, right, is that they're fairly static and they don't often lead to any sort of action items. I actually stumbled upon two little funny images that I want to share just based off of browsing LinkedIn the other day that I also think kind of hit home this point a little bit more. So the first one here, as we can see, right, kind of goes into talking about all the different types of charts, that we can deal with from big data that ultimately say that, hey, I'm just throwing up my hands, I'm giving up, I'm hitting the liquor store, and I'm about to get drunk instead. Who's with me? And I can't tell you the number of times where I've seen folks throw up any type of different metrics, not just the 4 key metrics that we've talked about so far with Dora, but these gorgeous Tableau interfaces. And I look at that and I need someone to help me interpret it. I actually don't even know what they mean.
Oh yeah, no, we have this all the time in operations, for example. You just have these Datadog dashboards or, whatever you're using for a Grafana, just filled with graph after graph after graph. And every time you look into each graph, yeah, there's some cool stuff there. But sometimes we get into this mistake that just more is better. So we just throw every graph at it, just in case there's something you want to know that you didn't hear. Here's another graph for it. And we've seen this with customers too, where they come to us and say, we want to help measure engineering. And it's so easy to fall down that slippery slope of, but also this metric. Oh, but actually I wanted to hit this metric and this one. And you end up with something like this.
Yeah, I think the root cause there, right, is that it feels good to have more metrics on a page because you feel like you can make more data informed decisions. But usually it comes from the fact that you might not actually understand what the other metrics are telling you, and therefore just throwing more onto the pile. Surely that must fix that problem, right? And I actually have another image. It kind of relates to what we were just talking about that I just wanted to show here. And that's this other great, this is marketing dashboard, but we can pretend this is the engineering dashboard, right? Where you also, throw up a vanity metric that you're hoping, hey, that looks good, right? It goes up and to the right, and that's what we want. Or you have outdated parts of your dashboard or a completely outdated dashboard. If you're, again, sifting through Tableau, trying to figure out what is updated, what is not updated, that can be kind of tricky. And then my favorite one is that graph in the bottom right-hand corner that just looks good, but you have no idea what it does. You keep on taking a screenshot of it though and sharing it and saying, hey, look how great we're doing, right? And it's kind of goes into that you have way too many things going on, but you're also a little bit afraid of figuring out what is the most important piece. So why not just throw it all out there and just hope for the best, right? That nobody really catches on.
Oh yeah, and well, even in the best case, like there is meaning there and there is value. It is showing you something, but so often we don't go to that next step and say, what do I expect to do with this information? Like it's cool to know your architecture diagram visualized as a giant network. Neat. What am I going to do with that? Am I going to make a different decision today?
Exactly. And I think that's the most important point here is that, throughout working with customers over the year, we've realized that the folks that are the most successful versus the folks that are not as successful, there's kind of a three-step process that really fuels those successful teams. Where first, it's all about collecting the data. And this is really what these dashboards that we've been talking about, that's what they're all about, right? Collecting the data, making sure that you trust the data and that it's accurate. But then the next step, and this tends to be the hardest step, right, is being able to tell a story around these metrics, what they mean for us. And we really need to make sure that's something that's a shared narrative because, again, that example, right, of you and me looking at the same dashboard, but getting two completely different interpretations. I can't tell you the number of times that's happened, both on the engineering side and non engineering side. And you come together a month later and realize, wow, we've done something completely different. So that second step, right, creating a shared narrative that we agree upon that, hey, this is what this data means to us and what should we do about it? And then the third step in that process is making sure that we are keeping ourselves accountable by driving some sort of outcome and getting a list of action items that we know that we need to agree upon. And when we have that process in place, that's when we see that our customers are the most successful with implementing a program like this.
Right. Okay. So just going back to dashboards, the problem with dashboards is they tend to be very static. They may show you way too much, meaning that it's hard to get any value out of it. They may show things that are out of date or things that don't really drive action. And then that's really the final problem of dashboard is really the first step in a series of steps to get that value to help you align your engineering and your business goals.
Yeah, so with that in mind, we found that the way to be successful with that three-step process is to be able to attach it to some sort of ongoing ritual or ceremony that you might already have within the organization. So this could be a sprint review, for example, or a monthly checkup on how the engineering organization is doing. And I think in the case of what we're doing today, it makes sense to take a look at something from a monthly perspective because within those first 30 days, it might make sense to just say, hey, how did the last month or the last couple of months before that go? So I can start getting an understanding of how is my new engineering organization doing. All of these that we have right here are predefined templates that you can use to be able to kickstart that effort, but they're completely customizable. So you can feel free to add in additional metrics, widgets, etc., into this to be able to view the data that makes sense to you.
So you just said a couple things there. One is we were talking about dashboards and now dashboards aren't enough. And then you introduced this concept of review. Is review a dashboard? Is that just the sleuth name for it?
I would say that this is, a little bit of a concept similar to how you might have pull request reviews, right? That kind of workflow of opening up the work that somebody's done, or in this case, looking at some metrics, looking at some data that's coming through the different systems that we're connecting into here, and then following through a process. So it's not just a static thing that you take a look at, but you're actually driven to do something throughout the process and come out with an artifact at the end. Could be a merge pull request, or in this case, a completed review within Sleuth.
Right. So going back to that concept where dashboards are a static thing that just kind of sit there. Maybe they update it in real time, but they just sit there. Whether you use them or not is kind of up to you. Sleuth is pushing you to go farther than that and actually interact with the data in a repeatable fashion. And we're just calling that reviews. But you could also, I imagine, call that reports or a weekly status meeting or anything like that.
Exactly. Yep. Now I have one of these monthly state of engineering reviews pre-filled, and that gives us a chance to be able to take a look at how this workflow actually operates within Sleuth. And if we open that up here, we can see the monthly state of engineering for right now, September 1st to September 30th. So this is just kind of looking back at the month of September and getting an understanding of how the engineering organization did during this time. And if we look at the table of contents over here, right, we have something familiar, for example, the door metrics. So we have all four of the door metrics and some additional accompanying metrics that can make sense there. And we can even dive into things like allocations, be able to understand where your organization is spending your time, if it's keep the lights on work or features, or maybe even DevEx and improvements, and just get that initial idea of, hey, not just what are we shipping, but what are we spending our time on?
So we're talking about a lot more than just Dora metrics, those four things. There's all kinds of other information that would be useful, that we found to be useful in ourselves and other teams.
Yeah, and the four key metrics are great to be able to use here. I think they're an industry standard for a reason, but sometimes you might just need a little bit more information that goes alongside with that, just to be able to understand, not just in terms of what has been shipped by looking at pull request commits, etc., but sprinkling in some of those additional pieces coming from your issue tracker to really help the business understand where you're going. Now, what's important here is that this can be customized for every level within the organization. So, me as a VP of engineering in this case, I might need some more information coming from Jira, more project based metrics. But if we want to maybe bring this into a team of mostly folks from software engineering, we might just focus on the DORA metrics alongside with some very detailed information about what's happening within pull requests. Like for example, if I go back up to the DORA metrics, we can see information coming from pull request activity and outliers here that have been highlighted for us. They're a little bit more of that detail. So we want to make sure that what we're looking at here isn't just a set of metrics for metrics' sake, but a set of metrics that make sense for you at the right time during that ceremony, and also for the right level in the organization.
Right. So it's really about taking all this data, according to your previous thing, the 437 different pieces of information, and whittling that down to almost a use case type approach, saying, if you're a VP of engineering trying to figure out where your teams are spending their time, you want the high level allocations. If you're a team lead, you want to know more nitty gritty. This PR is taking too long. This one got stuck, things like that. So it's about not throwing all the information in the world at you, but figuring out based on your use case and what you're trying to achieve, here is the pieces of information that can help you make a decision.
That's exactly right.
Okay, so this is about collecting the data. So we talked to how does Pulse collect this information?
Yeah, so we collect this information by hooking into your Git provider of choice, as well as your issue tracker of choice in this case, and then also things coming from, observability and incident management in order to be able to suck in all of this data. And then we do the hard part of pulling out the right metrics at the right time for you, just based on what widgets are added into a particular review, as well as who's a part of that process.
So I can pull in information from Jira, filter it down to different teams or people, and kind of compare and contrast. If I want to see team A versus team B, that kind of stuff, I'm able to filter it at that level.
Exactly. And you can even then create, little private areas for each team to be able to work and operate in so they can create their own reviews that make sense to them. We might all be working towards the same goal of improving a key metric by 20%, but the way team A does that might be a little bit different than team B. And we want to make sure there's flexibility in there while still, of course, aligning against these larger goals throughout the organization.
Right. So, okay, so I have this review or this report that I'm putting together, and I want only a certain amount of information. One thing that I think is really exciting, as someone who's been using this tool for the last well, I guess about 6 months or so in various early stages, is how these reviews almost write themselves. I don't need to go in and create these numbers, calculate them, fill out spreadsheets, fill out graphs, things like that. It just kind of created for me.
Yeah, and I think, if we go back to that use case, right, of being somebody fresh within the organization that just did those couple quick integrations through, honestly, a couple of clicks with each one, and we say, hey, let me just look at how the last month went, we're already seeing a ton of useful information. Even looking down to these two specific metrics that we have here around frequency, we can see a trend over the last 6 months or so, as well as batch size, right? How large are the things that we're shipping during that time? And these kind of are related, right? Being able to ship more things usually means that you cut up bigger things down into smaller chunks. And this gives us that quick view into how not just the last month, but how we trended over the last 6 months. And it started to maybe paint a picture for me without any additional context. But of course, there's still more to do, but this just gives me that baseline data that I can trust and start then thinking about, well, where are some areas of improvement that I might want to work on with my team?
Yeah, and that kind of almost gets us into the second point, because you just have these numbers usually, and data and graphs say, here, it's 5. Is 5 good? Is 5 bad? Is 5 better than it was? Is it worse? I don't know. And that's one nice thing I like about trends, is it doesn't just say you have this batch size, but that it's getting bigger over time. Okay, then that's maybe something I need to worry about. Maybe my pull request process isn't as healthy as I thought it was, or it's getting better. It's like, awesome. All that time we're spending toward tech debt is actually paying off, and we're getting a much stronger process and getting things out quicker. That's exciting. So the story feels like it's really well tied to these concept of trends.
Yeah. And what that allows me to do is, again, I keep on repeating the idea of coming in and looking this data fresh, is that I could spot trends. Like, for example, we see here that our frequency for the last couple of periods are down compared to where we were in the beginning of August. Is that something that I should be concerned about? Is that something that the rest of the organization might know that, hey, we knew this was going to happen? And really, the only way that me, as somebody new within the organization, can get an understanding of that is by having a conversation. So this is an opportunity for myself to maybe reach out to somebody like you, Don, and say, hey, I see that our frequency is going down the last couple of months. Is that something that we knew was going to happen? Is there some sort of initiative we're working on that would cause this to slow down? Or is this something that we should try to address to bring back the frequency, right? Is this a negative trend that we want to reverse? And is that maybe the first thing that I want to focus on in this 30, 60, 90 plan? But without having that conversation, all I see is that, numbers fluctuate up and down. It happens to go down the last couple of months. So do I really know if that's good or bad? I won't know until I have that conversation with somebody.
And that's step two. So, first step is to get accurate information that you can trust. And then step two is to be able to create a story or narrative around that information so that you know what you're looking at. Because a bunch of data isn't going to give you anything. You want to turn that into information. You want to turn it into the things that you can use to make a decision. And whether it's 5 or 6 is not going to be enough. So, what we're looking at right here, one could say it's just another dashboard. It just happens to be looked a little different, uses the word review instead of dashboard, but it's still just a bunch of graphs. How is this different? How does this help me achieve the goal of creating a narrative and understanding the meaning behind the numbers?
Yeah, so we can do this in a couple of ways. First of all, the idea behind this review, if I scroll up a little bit, is that we ultimately want to be able to publish this out so that we can have kind of a slice in time of what were our metrics and what do we think about those metrics during that time, and also be able to share that out then to the rest of the organization. And as a part of that flow, I want to make sure that for each one of these sections that we have here, we can see that we have something that says no summary yet, right? We want to be able to add in this contextual summary of what we uncovered in these metrics. And I can do that in a couple of ways. One, I could go in here and actually just type in myself what I think my interpretation of these metrics might be. If I'm new to the organization, that might be a little bit intimidating. So I can either start pulling in people in here by app mentioning them and saying, hey, could you help me interpret why, for example, our frequency went down? I also have the ability to, if I know that, hey, the door metrics, that's something that you, Don, are an expert at, I can go ahead and even pop in here and assign a user to this whole section to be able to go through and provide information and a summary of what happened within these metrics. I can also lean a little bit on AI to help us summarize some of the information that we see in here, because while humans are great at, of course, uncovering things that we can spot within a couple of data points, if we're looking at something like, well, what do we have here? 161 different changes that got shipped out. That can be a little bit intimidating to step through as well. So we can lean on AI, and we call this AI assisted summaries, where it's not intended to replace needing to go through and step through and say, hey, can we somehow reverse that trend in frequency? But it does help me summarize what's happened within all these different metrics within the door metrics section, and gives me a way to be able to quickly say, here are some patterns that we've uncovered in this large data set. And I can, of course, pop in here and say, increase frequency can be a target, and go ahead and hit save. And this already has kind of prompted me to take some action and create a narrative around this, whether it's solo, whether it's me leaning on somebody to, do this live, or that asynchronous back and forth. And then once I'm kind of happy with this, right, I can go ahead and share a traffic light kind of score and sentiment over what I think happened within the section. I think, hey, for the door metrics right now, the AI and myself, we agree that this is overall good.
Yeah, it makes sense. One way that we've been using this, because we create weekly engineering reviews using Sleuth to help us understand not only the data, such as your DORA metrics and things like that, but also which projects are we focusing on, what are people's blockers, kind of more information like that. But the fact that able to have different sections has been really useful, because we'll have one team or one feature team will have a section and a different feature team will have a different section. And we can kind of say each feature team should have a list of what they're prioritizing. They should have this metric and they should have a list of their blockers, whatever it is. And then I can assign the lead of each of those feature teams to fill out that section. So when I go look at it, I have a complete look of all the things that are happening in engineering, not only my metrics, but also that human element, and which is kind of what you're talking about. It's going beyond just the numbers 5. It's saying this is a really bad thing. We need to put more people on it, or this is a bad thing. We need to stop features and give it a bug fix rotation, or whatever the solution might be. But it helps me actually bring meaning to all of this data.
And I think that's really, the trickiest part of that second step, right, is being able to drive that meaning. And it just isn't something that can be done by just staring at, kind of a set of metrics and just taking a screenshot of it and just sharing that in the status update, right? You really want to be able to look into what does that number represent to us, and is that good for our team? Is that good for, that particular section that lead is working on, right? And then for yourself, right? What does that mean to you when you look at the larger picture? And without having that conversation, you're really going to struggle moving past that first step of just collecting data, which of course looks nice, but what are you doing with it?
Yeah, it's been the collaborative part that's really been a lot for our team, because it's not just about, as you say, the numbers and here's something, but it allows us to have a conversation. I'm able to suggest something, they respond with something else. The data shows this, why is that happening? And we can kind of get beyond just the number into it and have that all in one spot. So when you talked about publishing that artifact, this thing can go to my other co-founders, and if they want to know what's going on in engineering, they have a completed review that not only says here's some numbers, but that narrative around it. What is the thing that you should be taking away? And then really for the executives, all they care about are we good? Or are we bad? And if they're bad, they might have more questions, but if they're good, they kind of don't care and want to move on. So I kind of like how it forces you to say, are you good or bad on each section? So you can kind of roll that up in a nice, clean way and say, yeah, overall engineering's good. Don't worry about it. Or if it's bad, let's focus on the areas that we need help and not focus on the areas that are going well.
Yeah, and that's where that table of contents is also super helpful, right? Because it gives you that quick at a glance view of what might be something that you should pay attention to compared to something that's completely okay. And yeah, eventually you might want to dive into it. But if we all have limited time to focus on certain things, right, we should probably take a look at the things that are either yellow or maybe even red, right, as our kind of primary targets. Yeah, and I think now is a good point to also start talking about that third step within that process that we mentioned, because I think, even just summarizing this, right, and taking a look at this information, getting an idea of, hey, are we good? Are we okay? Or do we need to really get all hands on deck to help focus on something? We can still go a little bit blind because we need to understand what should we do to be able to hold ourselves accountable to anything that we find in here, right? So if we say that, hey, increasing frequency, it may be a target that we want to take a look at, how do we make sure we drive that? So when I get back then in here next month and I take a look at how do things go in October, that I achieve the things I set out to achieve or not? So with that in mind, we have these objectives and priorities sections that we can take a look at here, where we can set up some initial goals for ourselves, right? So again, looking into the 30, 60, 90 plan, I might want to implement door metrics. And as a part of this, if I configure this widget, we can see that I can very quickly come in and provide a rating, right? Again, a traffic light. I love this just because it gives us a quick little, gut feel check of where we're at. Is this kind of falling off, or are we on target, or have we achieved this? And I can also provide some update here and like I said here, narrowing things down, right? And then next month when I come in, I can say, oh, we're green now because we're on track and we are actually narrowing things down even further and doing a proof of concept of a tool, for example. Uh, yeah, or the same thing can go here with, for example, reducing change lead time by 20%. So we've identified a few areas of improvement. We're not quite there yet, so that's kind of yellow here as well. And finally, when we take a look at the priorities, right, this is when we take a look at the priorities, this is when we will dive in and see the specific action items that we have decided on that we need to take in order to be able to achieve these goals. So, for example, from my previous review, right? So, this is going back to what I looked at in August. I set up that I wanted to find a tool to help track door metrics, and I wanted to identify ways to reduce review time. So time spent waiting for a PR to be reviewed. And for each one of these, I can come in and say, hey, this was completed, this is on track, or maybe it's deprioritized. And in that case, I might want to be able to have an explanation in terms of why that was deprioritized, right? Something else came up that really was a critical thing that just meant that I could not spend the time on this particular initiative. But in this case, I was on track, and maybe identify ways to reduce review time is deprioritized. And then I can come in here and say, reduce coding time by X. And when I then open up this review come October, I'll see now that reduced coding time by X was brought in. So it gives me that list of items that we agreed upon as we were walking through this particular review, and hold myself and the team accountable to making sure that we're paying attention to the things we did say that we were going to do, and then give an update in terms of where all that is.
Yeah, this right here is probably my single favorite widget or area of Sleuth, which is this ability to summarize the couple things that a team did, a feature team, or the couple things they're focusing on from here. And what's great about it, there's really nothing to do with metrics. This is just really talking to a feature lead and say, what are you focusing on? We're trying to get this thing shipped. We're trying to get it feature complete so we can start QA. Whatever it is that they're focused on, that allows me to glance through and say, what are people doing? And then again, going back to that scoring, I can say if the team's doing bad, then I can look at, okay, what are they focusing on? Are they focusing on the right things? Are they focusing on the wrong things that need more help? And by having people list out their priorities, it sounds so simple because it really is. You're just listing out what you're going to work on next. That's really it. And then you're scoring what you said you were going to work on. It's not complicated. But this is probably my biggest tool to help keep my teams aligned and focused on the right thing. The other thing I want to talk about real quickly is this objective section. We ended up using this as a way to do cascading OKRs in a really lightweight sense. So we have the things that the team is focusing on as each individual objectives up there. And then every week we go and we rate ourselves based on this goal of stability at 80% or, whatever the number is, whatever the OKR is. How well did we do? Good, bad, okay. And then some textual things. So this is where you give the context, because it's not enough to just say we did terrible. Why? Oh, we got sidetracked because we hit this critical bug, or we had to onboard this big customer that took away resources, whatever. So you're not only giving that tracking of your OKR and helping it stay in people's minds, but you're also looking at your actions that week and say, how well did that align to this goal? And that's really what a lot of these things are about, for me anyways, is alignment. Get the teams aligned with each other so they're going in the same direction. Get them aligned with what the business wants, what our top priorities for the company are. Are they working on that, or are they getting distracted by something? This is a very simple, lightweight way to track that for my teams.
Yeah, and keeping a cadence alongside with this, right? Being able to then bring in what did we score this at previously in the same cadence, again, whether it's on a monthly basis, whether it aligns with the sprint, maybe it's something you do weekly. You can see, what did we talk about last time? What did we score ourselves at last time? And what are we thinking about now? So you kind of keep that context going throughout this, and it's not just a one-off kind of thing. Well, I'll have to go back into the August numbers in order to be able to pull that out. No, this is automatically being brought forward with every review that you're doing as a part of that cadence.
That's such a great point, because so often when you get a new tool that gives you information, usually through a dashboard, you look at it once and you might get some cool information out of it and you forget about it because it just sits there off on the side. You never look at it again. You're like, oh, right, I got to look at that thing. And then you look at the bill for next year and you're like, wait a minute, why am I paying for this thing I never use? What's cool about these Sleuth reviews is that recurring aspect. We use this every single week. So if we didn't have it, we'd have to collect our own metrics. We'd have to figure out a new system to do it. It wouldn't handle all the automated aspects that we like. The AI helps us summarize. We'd lose that. Like, it's something we'd start to depend on, not just something that sits off on the side.
Yeah, and something we haven't really brought up, right, is we can go in here, we can, of course, look into this ourselves and kind of remember, well, okay, it's the next month, I need to be able to look into my data again. But we can set up some sort of idea of when this review is due so that we can get notifications along the way and be able to say, okay, I set this up so I need it to be due by the end of the month. And now, if through email or my favorite chat ops tool, I'll be able to get that notification and pull me in. So I know that it's time to do this again. And that reminder's built in into the tool.
Oh, and that's such a time saver. Like for me, with I have the different feature leads working on things, the tool then tells them they need to fill out their sections. The tool helps them fills out the sections and then lets me know when it's all ready. So I don't need to go on to my chat tool or whatever and say, hey, don't forget to fill this out. Please have it done before the meeting. That is so tiring. And the fact that the tool can take that from me, honestly, right there has been a game changer.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite features as well, especially if it's something that I might not always be a part of. Let's say I'm just pulled in to provide a little bit of additional information for, one particular data point. Just getting that notification in Slack, for example, and say, "Hey, somebody mentioned you in here with this question." I can pop right into the Sleuth and be able to just provide my update or provide my note, and I've given some context, right, that I was asked for without having to constantly check which of these am I a part of. Oh, I got pulled in for this one random one I normally don't participate in, right? So it really helps understand where I should be focusing and where I should be paying attention, and still, get pulled in into some of those that I don't usually participate in and be able to contribute.
Yep. All right, so we've talked about why dashboards are dead to just go over the top as we tend to do for fun. But the idea is it's really just the beginning. It's a good starting point to have information, but it's easy to have too much information. It's easy to have wrong information and not really get any value out of it. And with Sleuth, you can then take it and go to those next levels. Step one, getting the right information that you can trust. Step two, to tell the story behind that information, to turn that information, that data into information so that you can actually action it. And then step three, to hold yourselves accountable with that and not just be looking at the data, but to track what your efforts are, track that over time so that you can continuously improve. Because the whole goal of all of this is to improve. Just to know what you're doing and not planning to do anything with it is not that useful. Your goal is to go from point A to point B, to better align your engineering org with your business goals so that you can have more success. So, Carl, before we go, I want you to show one more thing that we didn't talk about. We're not going to let us spend a time on, but when you think back into Sleuth, having used this now for the last few months, what is one of those little hidden gems that you get a lot of value from?
One of my favorite features of Sleuth is what we were talking about there with the Slack integration, allowing me to be either notified when somebody has mentioned me and I can jump in and provide some additional context, or if somebody is out sick for the week, I can jump in and maybe even take over the section that they were working on just temporarily for that week to be able to provide some additional information. But that can go a step further, and we can actually go and start sending out surveys to my team where I can jump in here and I can maybe either do a squad health check or maybe a developer sentiment survey that allows me now to send out a particular set of questions. For example, I'm satisfied with our development tools and practices. I get enough focus time and some of these key questions that we like to track over time on the engineering team. And I can drop that into Slack on a monthly basis and be able to get those questions answered along the way. So I can mix in qualitative and quantitative responses into a single review and be able to see, hey, based on the feedback from the engineering team, we are trending in the right direction, or maybe we focus on the wrong things, and the engineering team can help us uncover that alongside with some of these more hard metrics like the door metrics, for example.
All right, Carl. So we've been talking a lot about Sleuth, how excited we are, how much value we've gotten, and the companies we've been working with. If you are interested in this and think it would provide some value for you, it is available now. How would they get information about it?
Yeah, they can head over to sleuth.io, and right here up at the top, we have Talk to Us. So that allows you to just reach out to us so we can start having a conversation about what we can do to help you implement this workflow and this process around engineering metrics.
And we're also perhaps a little silly in saying this, but Carl and I have talked about maybe doing a few more of these to dive into aspects like surveys, dive into allocation, some of these things that we just kind of glanced over here, but there's a lot of depth and a lot of meat on those bones, a lot of value that you could use to help your teams align engineering and business. Thank you, Carl, for coming by. I know that you shared a lot of cool stuff. I'm very excited about what we've been working on. I'm very excited about the value we've been getting and our customers have been getting. Go visit sleuth.io. If this sounds like something to be useful for you, let's chat and see how we can help you better align your engineering and business organizations.